FEAR Perseus Mandate came out in 2007 as the final expansion pack for FEAR. It was once again outsourced from Monolith to Timegate Studios, whose last expansion pack won Expansion of the Year. Perseus Mandate didn't win Expansion of the Year. Time to find out how. Quite easily, actually. If I had to describe Perseus Mandate in one word, it would be confusing. My confusion had reached its height by the end of Interval 5. Everyone had said this game sucks, but I was really enjoying it. Yeah, the quality's clearly dropped, but the meat of the game is still solid. And then I finished it. It took me 2 days. By the midpoints of Interval 7, I was begging for a mercy as sweet as a credit screen. This game just gets worse and worse and worse and worse, and it makes me very upset. Most people at that point would just play something else, or talk to their friends. But not me. No, I had told everyone that I would make a fully edited years later video on this. Oh goody. So without further ado, let's just begin. Upon starting this game, the first thing you'll notice is that it looks awful. That'll also be the second, third, and next 10 things you'll notice about the game. It sounds awful too. You're supposed to be in a cargo plane in this intro, but it sounds more like you're in a refrigerator. You're part of a new FEAR team, this time playing as the Sergeant, and your teammates, Captain Rains and Lieutenant Chen, look, well, I mean, these are vital characters, and the base game from 2 years ago has them beat. As for their personality, Rains is a deep-voiced hard-ass.
We've got Delta Force choppers inbound. Let's move!
And Chen is a wisecracker.
Looks like my apartment in here.
That's about it. Betters is back. Yeah, I finally remembered his name. And he briefs you about something that's going down at Armorcam. You know, the routine excuse to get you into some rooms and corridors. The three of you then dive out of the plane and parachute down. I said, they parachute down. Yep, just bear with me here for a second. Okay, we're finally down, and so hands up if you notice the bugged out replica first. Okay, and hands up if you notice the hilariously awful environment first. It defies belief just how bad Interval 1 looks. The moon has been on protein apparently, the textures are just disgusting, but the worst offender is the lighting. Why is this area so perfectly lit? At night. No lights in the world illuminate a storm drain like this. It's just awful. But that's nothing in comparison to that. Okay, A, what is this? And B, how did this make it past playtesting? Did not a single person point out that this giant wall was clipped into the drain? The rest of the game really doesn't fare much better. If it's not brown or grey, it's low-res, underdeveloped rubbish. The lighting systems are not used to proper effect in Perseus Mandate. Everything is too well lit. I mean, just look at this city. The sea just randomly ends, and the ground doesn't exist. And the roof's just a solid texture. Look at this shit. The only areas of the game that look good are the combat, as usual, this train yard, the abandoned metro, and the subway level from Extraction Point, but reversed. Let me just remind you that this game came out in 2007. Right, this was the year that Halo 3 and Crisis were released. Yet, this expansion looks worse than the base game 2 years after. How do you even manage that? Development time is my guess, because a lack of polish will soon show itself as an underlying theme. After being dropped in, you'll notice that you still have reflex mode, despite not being the point man. There's no explanation for that, let's just stick to questions we can answer. Rains and Shen actually fight alongside you, which is the second time the series has attempted friendly AI. And after its incredibly successful introduction in Extraction Point, how bad could it be? Extraction Point only did it once, and it had you on an extremely wide arena to avoid any issues with the AI. Perseus Mandate keeps you close, so you get AI rapidly switching targets as you and your teammates close in. This looks ridiculous and seems to break the AI. Look at it like this. In Extraction Point, that giant open area meant that even if you were at the opposite side from Holiday and both shot the same enemy, that enemy would only have a small area to switch between to respond to you both, because you're so far apart from each other. Your accuracy at that distance and how spread out the enemies are would also make aggroing the same guy unlikely. Here you've got dense enemies who you can easily gang up on, and since the distance is so small, they might have to rapidly respond to targets in a 360-degree radius around them, which has them spazzing between targets or spinning like a ballerina. In Extraction Point, with only one other friendly combatant, a higher chance you'd attack from a similar direction, and a lower chance you'd ever even aggro the same guy, the probability of these problems occurring was vastly lower. For the first time, Perseus Mandate has you fight the replica assassins with your teammates, and in Interval 1 of all places. The placement means that there's pretty much no build-up at all, apart from a tiny tease, and that means the drawn-out tension building that the last two games used is absent. They're also placed in a perfectly lit arena, and you're not on your own, killing any chance of them posing a challenge or their presence being unsettling. They're pushovers, let's move on. Soon after you'll come to a dam. Damn, these environments suck. The real attraction of this area though is what you'll find at the bottom of this ladder. You hear the static, so you know something's coming. You then see Jankowski going down an alleyway, so you follow him. And the alley's empty, and full of blood. In the last games there wouldn't have been anything here, to play on that unpredictability they think they have. But when you turn around to come out after picking up the medkit, the guy's just standing there and the music does its jump scare noise and I died a little. Perseus Mandate does this on 2 other occasions and neither are as scary, but it also has a few ruses to keep you guessing. I like this since it tempts you into them with items as if you're a kid following a trail of sweets. As I remember it, the base game only did this once. Not much further up, you'll come by something a lot more interesting, the grenade launcher. The first of 3, yes, 3 new weapons in Perseus Mandate. The grenade launcher is comically shit. When in the hands of the AI, it can mean an unpredictable one-shot death. When in your hands, it's total crap. You shoot it at a guy, a third of the time it'll miss him entirely, a third of the time it'll go near him and then detonate when he's moved out of the way, and the other third of the time it'll bounce off something and kill you. If someone gets close range, you're dead thanks to splash damage. In fact, unless you fire it a country mile away, you're brown bread regardless. The radius of the explosion is much larger than the game lets on, and there isn't even a reload animation, the guy just hides it off screen. On my second playthrough, I got pretty good with it, leading my shots, getting the right angles. It was pointless because every other weapon outclasses it, but it was kind of fun. Well, after you've run out of ammo, you might notice the game's new weapon distribution. It gives you a wide variety of the more fun, basic weaponry instead of swamping you with one-shot power weapons too early on. Dual pistols are for the first time common, which was absolutely amazing, and the game even brings an ammo full prompt to keep you from clicking on every weapon you see. A great quality of life change. The final arenas of Interval 1 are on the surface, in this pretty awful looking town, fighting your way through ATC in some intense battles. Cars explode here, which adds a lot to the spectacle, and once you've punched through ATC, you've made it into the Armacam data center, now in Interval 2. Yes, more rooms and corridors, but they're a little more varied than the base game. Level design here is certainly competent, but that creativity that sold Extraction Point is very clearly lacking. In that game, I could remember every fight. Here, nothing stood out from the start. You'll very quickly be introduced to the first new enemy faction we've seen since ATC, the Mercenaries, or as they're later called, the Nightcrawlers. They were teased up by this knife throw scare in the previous level, which I thought was really good. The first one you fight is actually one of the specialist types. They've got huge health bars, extremely damaging guns, dodge animations, and even condescending voice lines. They're extremely agile, but not so much that you can't rush them down in reflex mode, which is pretty much the only effective strategy. Outside of reflex, you're dead in a split second thanks to their damage output. The rest of the mercs are like the replica but dressed in silly looking red armor with comically deep voices and packing the VES Advanced Rifle, the second new weapon of the expansion. The Advanced Rifle's got a pretty boring name, and that's apt because it might just be the most boring weapon in the entire series. It's a slow firing assault rifle, so it's boring by nature like the classic assault rifle, but unlike that, it's not much fun in reflex mode because its RPM is too low. It's slightly overpowered thanks to its low recoil, but that's not an issue because you'd have to be a sadist to use it for more than 5 minutes. Shortly after that, you meet back up with the FEAR team and the story picks up a little. You see a man tied to a chair being interrogated by some CIA looking arsehole. He wants to know the decryption code.
The decryption code, Mr. Bristol. The code, the code, the code.
He, the guy strapped to the chair, and the mercenary's leader who shows up to slit the captive's throat are all very well voice acted in this scene. I was impressed. You learn that Morrison, the CIA guy, wants to know about synchronicity. He's under the impression that it's an object of some kind rather than an event, as we and the captive knew. This game seems to be setting up an interesting story. It raises the stakes even further with one of the best uses of horror I've seen in FEAR. Chen tells you to keep an eye out for a girl in a red dress, about 8. We of course know exactly who that is. The captain asks Chen what he's on about, and he replies with, "She was right there." This is really good. Perseus Mandate knows it's an expansion pack, and that anyone who plays it will know exactly who they're referring to. It's a great way of telling the player that they're about to get screwed. And so you do. You go into some kind of reactor core room and it starts exploding and lights start coming on and then demons come flying up and it's just the weirdest thing. It's not scary, it's not funny, it's just odd. Much like the previous horror sequence you saw in some kind of facility. Chen's leg gets stuck and that's it. It's really confusing. Are they supposed to be scary? Thankfully though, the game picks right back up with its third and final weapon introduction. The lightning arc rod conductor is much better than the grenade launcher. What an achievement. It fires a bolt of electricity at a guy and they fall over. There's a small chain effect, which is cool I guess, and the bodies of enemies smoke on a kill, so there's that. There's a lot of aim assist because it's lightning. That's about it. You get 16 shots per pickup unless you get it from an enemy, and since it's not handed out often, it never gets old. Certainly not remarkable, but both the minigun and the laser carbine return in Perseus Mandate, so regardless, the weapon variety is at an all-time high. Soon after, you're off to Interval 3. Those first two intervals were presented awfully. The new guns were underwhelming, to put it lightly, but I still enjoyed myself, because combat in FEAR is combat in FEAR. You've still got amazing weapons, slow-mo, and an AI that puts everything else to shame. As for the horror, on the other hand, it's clear that Timegate, instead of trying to fix the horror's problems, gave up. There's a few pretty good scares, but I've told you about every major horror segment in the first two intervals. There was about 4. Actually, 5, because Alma blows you out of a window at one point, which seems to be one of her hobbies. All of them were very short and insignificant. Interval 3 cements this. The horror's just not there. It's all combat, and it tries to be as spectacular as it possibly could be. It effectively has you assaulting Armacam with allies that can actually die. It's all-out war, arena on arena of enemies. I like this. The series has never done anything like it before. And not much later, you find out that the villains are after something called the Source. Morrison wants to collect it personally, and the Mark leader agrees. As soon as Morrison leaves earshot, however, the mercenaries conspire to kill him as soon as the code to access the Source is decrypted. This was really interesting. Complex villains, politics, wow. And it gets even better. You're running down a corridor when a shutter closes behind you, and in front of you. You're trapped. You've been captured by ATC, but then you hear rumbling, and Timegate's giant mech smashes out into the corridor, butchering your captors. You can do nothing but run. Not just through this corridor, but throughout a large part of the building. The mech can be heard stomping above you, and when it drops down, it'll smash its way through walls to stay on your tail. Being hunted dynamically is a lot of fun. This not only does AI-controlled horror, but also links horror and combat, all through a more creative use of smart objects. After a while fleeing, you come across some rocket launchers and can finally take the fight to the mech. It's an incredible encounter, and exemplifies everything I want from the series. If only they did a bit more with the horror here, it could have been perfect. Having bright lighting was not the right choice for the mood they wanted to create, and there should have been more places for the mech to smash through other than just door arches. Is this not the ultimate proof that everything the game needed to justify and facilitate its horror was already present in the game? It's a true shame that the concept was built on halfway into FEAR's final expansion. Later on, you find out that Paxton Fettel is the Source. The Source refers to wherever the replica's DNA template came from. You also find out that there was a second Perseus facility located on an island. Now, the only thing standing between you and Morrison are those Merc specialists from before. At one point, they even come in pairs. Proximity grenades are your friend here, and like every other enemy in the game, your best bet is to just burst them down in reflex mode. You soon come by Morrison, but he bolts, and so begins Morrison's chase. The Morrison chase composes the rest of Interval 3, all of Interval 4, and all of Interval 5. Interval 3 ends with armies of highly armored ATC keeping you from Morrison. The game provides you with a minigun from a crashed helicopter, and there was a laser carbine just beforehand, so you're well equipped to deal with what is possibly the highest concentration of elite class enemies the series has seen thus far. Cover is sparse, and while this big plaza adds to the spectacle, it's not right for FEAR. There's no cover apart from this statue. Timegate themselves mastered FEAR's level design with the funeral home arena of Extraction Point, so I can only wonder why they refused to iterate on it in Perseus Mandate. Nevertheless, this section remains a blast throughout, and very much so at the end when the vault explodes, allowing Morrison to slip away. Reigns is trapped above, but you and Chen manage to bust open a door and run down this hilariously bleak corridor right into Interval 4. You and Chen are trapped in some ancient underground metro, a perfect setting for the shitstorm you're about to encounter as Alma's demons are set free. The first ones you'll encounter are the Shades, but the combat forms rather than their infinitely more effective horrific cousins, though they haven't gone either. You and Chen progress through the barren ruins, being tormented by Alma until you're separated from Chen and he's trapped in a room with a group of Shades. This was how Holiday died. The lights go out and the shouting and gunshots commence, but he survives. An intentional twist of expectations, I'm sure, but he doesn't survive for long after being grabbed by Perseus Mandate's new demon, the Scarecrows. These guys pull you into the underworld or something, where you die, I guess. You try to save Chen, but that goes about as well as can be expected. Scarecrows show up on multiple other occasions throughout the level, but they're total pushovers. If you get caught out, you can just shoot them in the face, and that's it. If you see their obviously telegraphed hole, you can just shoot it and leave. It doesn't work for the horror either, because you always know when and where they're going to come from. A disappointing debut of the new demon. Thankfully, you've still got the Shades to scare the shit out of you. Chen also pulls this trick, but since Jankowski, it's pretty predictable. Eventually, he'll catch up to Morrison, who's managed to survive against the Shades somehow. He climbs up a ladder and you soon follow, finding yourself in a very familiar looking subway. The Mercs have found Morrison, but more importantly, you found the Mercs. There's yet another army of enemies down here, making for a pretty tense firefight. This is the same subway from Extraction Point, but with more boxes and the progression reversed, so it doesn't feel the same even if it is reused, and the battle will keep you from questioning it, until you come out of the exact same entrance you used last time. If the plane has already crashed, that places this moment between the point man walking up to the church and entering it, because of course the plane crashed only seconds before Paxton came back and reactivated the replica. But then why didn't we hear it crash? Well, that would be because I'm hugely overthinking it and Timegate just shamelessly reused a level without even trying to cover it up. You do eventually stop retracing the point man's steps and go a separate way. Rain somehow managed to survive, and the two of you agree to stay on Morrison's tail. That leads you to a train yard, which is easily one of Perseus Mandate's best looking environments. The replicas surround the area, still deactivated, but it's very clear that's not going to last. Rains tells you he's noticed replica activity, and then they ambush. It's a fight in the train yard with loads of cover and sightlines, much like the subway showdown in Extraction Point. Also like that arena, you start in the midst of the trains and end up on the tracks, but here it's in a warehouse. The fight's brought down by the lightning gun, which makes the entire arena a pushover. It can down heavies with only 3 to 4 shots, so throwing 2 heavies at you isn't much of a challenge. You continue through this warehouse type environment through multiple replica infested arenas until the Shades show up in this arena filled with graphical glitches? Okie dokie. Thankfully, the game makes up for it almost immediately after with one of the weirdest horror sequences the series has ever seen. You start walking through a corridor, and as corridors do in Fear, it gets longer. Shades do their spaz effects in the grate above. You then fall down into this pool of blood, swim further down, and end up in a room that seems to form out of darkness. Chen shows up, very upset looking, the Shades do their jig, and then Chen shouts at you, exploding in the process. This was pretty funny. You then walk through scarecrow-infested hospital rooms and end up going through the exact same chamber over and over again as it gets progressively more bloody. Then the room just sort of breaks. Then you jump through a door in the floor back into the real world. Jesus Christ. Quite the trip. But that was really creative and unlike anything the series has done before, which is why, in all honesty, it's my favourite horror sequence we've seen so far. It's not scary, but only parts of Extraction Point ever had any fear factor without relying on jump scares and screeching noises, so I didn't have any expectations. If it can't be scary, it can at least be atmospheric and, most importantly, entertaining. After you've dealt with that, the mercenaries show back up. You can hack their laptops to hear what they're planning. Apparently, they've lost 6 men to the monsters in the dark. You see a Shade, sitting, staring like the creepy bastard it is. The remnants of the mercenaries' temporary setups are lying about, with their cases, their IT, and their black trucks. It's good stuff. You'll also see a communicator playing a message between Morrison and the Senator, who now wants to abort whatever mission they were originally planning. Speaking of Morrison, you find him trapped in a cage. He begs to be let out, and after explaining that the Nightcrawlers are trying to get Alma's DNA and that he knows a shortcut to beat them to it, you do. You follow him over to this secret entrance in a wall, and guess who you meet on the other side? Paxton is Baxton for the second time. It's like a ritual now. He says, "You made it. I was beginning to wonder." That makes me think, why does Paxton care about you? You're just some random sergeant, not the point man. You don't have any significance, right? Well, that'll have to wait for later. The shortcut Morrison mentioned is through these supply tunnels, which are lit surprisingly well. Alma's also down there, and she's really not very happy. She flips a truck right on top of Morrison. Fuck. It's funny, because if you imagine Morrison as my enjoyment of the game and the truck as Interval 6, you've got a pretty accurate representation of my thoughts on the ensuing level. The problem with Interval 6 is that it's boring. It's boring in level design, its environments are boring, its arenas are boring, everything is boring here. You're trapped in an abandoned mine infested with Nightcrawlers, so you fight them, endlessly, through boring muddy arenas over and over again. It really drags on. It's pretty much the antithesis of Extraction Point's design philosophy. You know, creativity, variation. This is half an hour at least of the same Nightcrawlers in very similar muddy rooms. This was an expansion pack released 2 years after the first game. It was also the final content the original Fear would ever see. It cannot get away with being samey. Sadly, this also carries into Interval 7, the final level. Let's talk about the interesting stuff first. So this is the cloning facility where everything to do with Perseus originated. So that's the replica, Paxton, the telepaths. It's also the location you visited in many of the horror sequences sequences. So those were kinda like flash forwards. That's pretty cool, but surprise surprise, the game doesn't do anything with it. Paxton gives you an audio commentary of the facility, which is very nice of him. He tells you that this is where he grew up. He shows you to his room, he tells you all about the horrible stuff they did to his mother. Apparently they had him locked away down here to protect him from Alma, and she first visited him 3 years after she died. He says that he only met his brother on the day that he was killed by him. This brother being the Point Man, of course. He even says that you remind him of the Point Man, which seems like a fourth wall break, because I highly doubt there's an in-law reason you have reflex mode unless you're Alma's secret third child. Wait, what does the wiki say? Oh, thank God. No, this is just an out-of-place fourth wall break. It's funny because Paxton says he didn't like the Point Man either. Well, if he doesn't like us, why is he giving us a guided tour of his childhood? And if Alma has no reason to let us live, why doesn't she just kill us on the numerous occasions we encounter her, like she has to pretty much everyone else? Yeah, this facility is quite literally stacked with bodies. These are the people that hurt her or something. Or should I say, this is the person, because it seems to me that the same guy has died about 20,000 times. One character model. They only had one character model. Good fucking grief. Okay, let's just ignore the story for our collective mental health and have a quick look at the combat. Interval 7 repeats all of Interval 6's mistakes. It relies on the exact same environments and almost the exact same enemies for what seems like 500,000 back-to-back combat arenas. This expansion has a penchant for throwing huge amounts of enemies at you, and by now you should be quite used to that. But in the last bunch of arenas, you'll encounter mercs with repeater cannons intermixed with armies of regular mercs and the specialists. These repeater cannons will do half your health at least on hit, and the enemy don't often miss. Combine that with a constant fire from every direction, and the only way to get out alive is to go into reflex mode and burst the troublemakers down, or hide behind corners, and the latter won't even work against the repeater cannon mercs. It's not that it's too hard, it's that it's not fun. The reflex over-reliance issues are back and worse than ever. This is the problem where you find that fighting without reflex mode is hugely wasteful on your limited medkit supply, creating a gross over-reliance on it. Great to encourage you to use reflex mode, not great for replayability, player freedom, or a combat system that's been spread over about 20 hours of content now. It's not impossible to play without reflex mode, but it is highly disincentivized. These issues have peaked here, they've hit a ceiling, and in these few arenas it's gotten to the point where the combat of the game somehow isn't fun. It takes a lot of effort to make FEAR's combat not fun, but Interval 7 has managed it. On the very common occasion that the specialist mercs show up, they've got a few new tricks up their arse, like throwing grenades and deployable turrets mid-somersault. These grenades still detonate on impact, like yours, so prepare to be one-shotted, but the turrets are a lot more manageable. You'll later come into an arena with 4 of the bastards, but I don't remember the repeater cannons being an issue here. You can quite easily treat these engagements like the others, just find one on his own and burst him down, rinse repeat. You'll have a mix of fighting mercs and the occasional horror bite from the start until the merc leader grabs Paxton's DNA and runs for it. You've got to chase him down through more arenas filled with mercs, and sometimes replica as well. After slaving through all of that, you get to the final boss. He's a merc specialist who can sometimes teleport. He's also got the grenade throw abilities, so that's great. The fight begins with him sending out normal soldiers to kill you, but they're packing all the ordnance you'll need to take the main man down. He does this twice and then finally dies. It's pretty easy, but considering Perseus Mandate's definition of challenging, I wouldn't want it to be anything but. You then grab Paxton's DNA and meet up with Captain Rains. It's the two of you in really boring looking arenas against the replica, and quite a bloody few replica. The game loads you up with medkits, body armor, and weaponry to fend off the horde, and it makes sure the arenas are wide to facilitate multiple friendly combatants. It's pretty fun, I'll admit, just a huge balls-to-the-walls battle. It certainly didn't feel like a final arena in terms of presentation, but it sure as hell played like one. The Black Hawk flies down to pick you up, and guess what happens? No, it doesn't blow up, but it is possessed. Chen's there waiting for you. The game plays a twisted version of a victory theme as Rain says you'll replace Chen as lieutenant, and Chen's ghost fades away. I like that the games always end on a dark note, but there's also an end credit scene. One of the specialists somehow managed to escape, and they bring the Senator a can of DNA, which was the one the Nightcrawlers got from Interval 3. I would research and speculate about this ending, but it doesn't matter. This is where the Vivendi timeline ends. FEAR 2 and 3 take place in Monolith's timeline, and that picks up after FEAR 1. So none of what just happened is considered canon. Perseus Mandate had the makings of a great story with stakes and intrigue. It only took a turn for the worse after Alma killed Morrison, because after that point the villains are reduced down to just the Nightcrawlers, who have no interesting motivations or backstory or anything. They just want the DNA for their boss. They're mercs, that's it. The interplay and politics between Morrison, the Senator, the Nightcrawlers, and Paxton disappears. Paxton isn't even an antagonist here, he just talks to you sometimes. His replicas still try to kill you, but Paxton himself seems totally indifferent. At least we got some cool backstories to Paxton's origins. Alma's just there sometimes, she doesn't seem to have a role to play. As for the FEAR team, Bettis mysteriously disappears after interval 3, Chen, or should I say Tesco Value Holiday, was pretty entertaining but died far too early, and Reigns was just boring. I kinda wish the roles were swapped, although that's not to say I didn't like Reigns. Getting to bond with him in the final arenas was pretty good. We didn't have any real motivation to get to the DNA before the Nightcrawlers. No one's life was at stake as it was an extraction point. Usually after talking about the story, I'd then talk about the horror, but what is there to say? There's some jump scares, some weird horror flash forwards, a crappy new demon, and the same Alma stuff we've seen 100 times beforehand. The shades are still here and they're still good, but can I praise Perseus Mandate for redoing Extraction Point? That one horror section in Interval 5 was one of the best in the series, and it's truly a shame we only got to see anything like it once. Combat was solid until Interval 6, where it became mind-numbingly repetitive thanks to Perseus Mandate's extremely samey level design and environments. The only explanation I can come up with for this is length padding, a result of complaints from the last expansion. The lightning gun was the only success of the 3 new weapons, and even that was underwhelming. The new enemies were either boring reskins or acrobatic mini-boss types with too much health and ridiculously out of place one-liners. The presentation of the game has taken an absolute nosedive and ended up somewhere in the Marianas Trench, especially when compared to other games that came out in 2007. And, you know, FEAR. It's a bitter note to end the original FEAR design on. But, for the first time, it doesn't end there. Perseus Mandate actually came with 3 bonus missions. It's pretty clear that each of these are amalgamations of cut arenas and unused assets, retrofitted to serve their respective purposes, but that allows them to sacrifice any need for immersion, consistency, or logic that you'd usually want from a normal level. So there's a great deal of variation in 2 of the 3. The first one is called Clinic, and it has you go through a level filled with various combat encounters and all the weapons you could ever dream of. They even bring back the drones from the first game. There's the occasional med kit to help you get through, but if you die, you restart the level. It's challenging and a great deal of fun, though the game forcing you to switch to any picked up weapons can get you unfairly killed. The second one is Arena, and it has you survive in an arena with supply drops between waves. They give you everything you need to survive against each horde, finishing with a giant mech. It really could have done with a few more waves, perhaps an endless mode, or multiplayer integration. The final bonus mission is called Sprint, and it simply wants you to get to the end like Clinic. This is probably my favourite from a presentation standpoint. It really looks great. But the problem is, if you find yourself on low health, you need to make it to the next health booster. There's no medkits. This means you have to play extremely defensively if you want to stay alive until the end, and that kinda defeats the point of Sprint. It's not much of a sprint. There's also no leaderboard, no in-game timer, and you can pick the difficulty yourself, so even comparing scores with friends or online isn't going to work unless you all agree to play on the same difficulty. Any inkling of competitive element these bonus missions could have had is just absent. Really, they're there for replay value, to test your own skills, and they serve that function excellently, but they could have been so much more. Nevertheless, these bonus missions are some of the best content in the game. So why weren't they in the campaign? I mean, this is Perseus Mandate, forget consistency. The Clinic and Sprint levels would just have to be rebalanced and you could bung them right in. The arena would work great with friendly AI. The presentation in these levels challenges even Extraction Point, yet the campaign looks like it was made in 2004. Once again, that word comes back. Confusion. Why is the game like this? Development time is really my only guess, but the story going off the rails, the horror just not being there? These don't seem like the results of stress. How can the bonus missions be so much better than the campaign? Perseus Mandate's development is a mystery, and that's all there is to say on it. On that blunt statement, it's time to end. Thanks for watching, everyone. If you'd like to see videos on FEAR 2, 3, or anything else, maybe consider subscribing. We managed to get Squid the Cid over the 1K mark 17 days before the cutoff point, and I consider that to be a victory. Let's keep trying for F.E.A.R and Red Value Gaming. I'll link both channels in the description as before. Thanks.